All right, welcome to the Campfire.
Thank you.
We had a beautiful conversation on your show, and I'm really excited about picking that up and bringing it to the Campfire itself. But before we get into it, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background.
Perfect. So my name is Nikki Yazbeck. And I have been teaching yoga for over 20 years. And then I also have a master's in social work. Um, but I'm so excited to be here. I really enjoyed having you on my podcast as well and talking about mindfulness and meditation and all the things that you do.
So this is where it gets cool because obviously my background is pretty prominent on my show, and I want to talk about the physical aspect. I talk a lot about the mental and mindful side of it. I want to talk about impact, in utilizing these ideas physically because we got to put these things up to the test.
Yeah. So you mean mixing like mindfulness and movement as in yoga?
Absolutely. I do it a lot through walking meditation, but being still, there's something to be said about that. So let's go ahead and dive right in and talk to me a little bit about those practices that you like to introduce people to.
I mean, for me, when I started yoga, it was 100% like a physical practice. And I did it because my mom had been into yoga and I wasn't really super interested for myself. And then I went to a couple classes and I found like I was good at it because I was hyper flexible, which isn't necessarily a good thing. I've learned later. Um, and so I think a little bit of it was like feeding my ego. And then as I started getting into yoga and started learning about the philosophy of yoga, then the like mindfulness aspect crept in. And that's kind of what hooked me into the practice. And then the interesting thing is that I get the same benefit when I teach as I do when I'm practicing, because I find even when I'm teaching, I can't think about anything outside of what I'm doing and saying, because if I start thinking about my grocery list or what I'm going to do later, I get lost in the sequence. And so I find that yoga for me is like totally a moving meditation. I get into that zone and I get into my body and I'm not thinking about other things about my day. And then also sometimes when those thoughts do pop up, like those thoughts about I'm going to compare myself to others or, oh, this is so hard or whatever, then it's about observing those thoughts and like noticing them when they do come up. And so I find like everything just kind of slows down for me during that yoga practice.
That's a lot with walking meditation and Reiki is it brings you into the moment. It doesn't really give you the opportunity to think about what's coming down the line. And what I really love about that is it brings meaning to the journey, to the experience, whether it's on a yoga mat or on a trail. Being present gives you such an opportunity to dissect just how you're moving. You get to feel the connection with with the space beneath you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even like down to our feet, because we don't think about our feet a lot. And so, in a lot of physical practices, we're thinking about the big muscles, but in yoga, we go down all the way to our feet and how our feet are touching the earth and how they're grounding and how our feet have four corners and how to ground them all evenly and our weight distribution. So you start thinking about like these micro movements in the body, which is really interesting, which I don't think a lot of other practices do, but I have done walking meditations and it's pretty similar where it's like feeling the pressure of the foot slowly on the ground and all the different sensations through the bottom of the foot.
One thing that I've noticed this year throughout hiking, because I've had a couple of feet injuries, is it teaches you to become more aware of the self care that you're utilizing after the fact. A lot of the time I'll bring that up to somebody. I'll be like, after a hike or even before, it's a good idea to stretch, whether it's, you know, just simply pulling your leg back or some kind of interesting yoga pose, whatever it is, getting that stretch in there is so important for our bodies because we're doing much more than just getting out to talk or, you know, focus on the mental aspect. There's that physical movement. So developing a self-care ritual afterward is become really a major focus of mine this year. I want to talk a little bit about that in the context of, just our daily lives, or even when we get into our hobbies, that time afterward.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that we do in a forward plane in life. And yoga is one of those things that breaks that pattern. So I think like if we could do something that breaks our normal pattern of movement, whether that be swimming or stretching or something else, I think that there's always benefit to that. Um, because it takes us out of what's usual and comfortable and maybe puts us in a place of discomfort. And I find like when we go in those places of discomfort, that's when we learn. Same thing with like meditation, right? That's really uncomfortable for a lot of people. And so it's going into that place of dis-ease for a moment and sitting in that space and seeing what comes up for us. Um, so yeah, I think like self-care is super important and we forget about that. And I think sometimes we float in and out of it. And it's important to find some way to connect with our body, some way. And I feel like movement is a really good way, but not a movement that is automatic that we kind of default to all the time. So maybe it's just running and we just run all the time and then our body gets an autopilot. I think it's good to get ourselves out of that autopilot state.
That autopilot state, I feel like, is something that, you know, it comes about is based off of the way we move through our day. A lot of us are result driven, or there's the pressure at work to produce. So if you take yourself out of the situation, it becomes a lot easier to just make the decisions and the moves that you have to move in order to get the result. But when you take the time for self care, it strengthens those muscles that kind of bring a comfort level to staying present within the process of getting those results through the day.
Yeah. Well, and I think also to piggyback on what you're saying, it's like maybe doing something that's not so result and goal oriented, right? Because if we're going to the gym, we have like this motivation and this determination and this goal. Or if we're running, we have this end destination that we're going to get to. But maybe it's kind of putting something in our day that involves self-care or activity or movement that doesn't have a specific goal or endpoint. Maybe the goal, or maybe changing the goal. Maybe the goal is instead of to hit this certain plateau, is to set. I always tell people to like set an intention and not always the same intention. So set a different intention. So maybe if you're going running and that's your thing, then maybe that intention for that day would be to focus on your breath or to focus on like turning off your headphones and just listening to the sounds of nature and doing maybe that same activity in a different way that we haven't thought of doing it. So that brings that mindful aspect into something that might be like a ritual for us.
Rituals are fundamental if you're trying to improve your quality of life. And that's where it gets back to the mindful aspect of it, because we all engage in some sort of ritual from the moment we get up till the moment that we go to bed. And a great example would be in the morning when we get up and brush our teeth or we pour a cup of coffee. When you become mindful or you start to build a mindfulness practice, you start to actually notice the movement. And when you do that in a quiet space, I feel like it carries through the day and it helps you become more present and add, an added layer of intention behind your movements, which, to get back to the point of how we're so goal oriented, those goals are more fulfilling. They're more satisfying when we achieve them.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think it's like if you can have those rituals, whether it's brushing your teeth or drinking that sip of water or setting an alarm clock every hour, just taking like a moment to check in with ourselves. So it doesn't have to be a big stretch of time. It doesn't have to be a 20-minute stretch where you sit down on a mat and you're quiet. But you could weave all that into like those daily activities. So like when you're brushing your teeth, just being really mindful of like, what does it feel like? And it just kind of like getting out of our head and instead of running around brushing our teeth while we're grabbing our clothes to get ready, just kind of slowing things down. I love that idea.
Which, it sounds good when we talk about it. but the execution of that, that's where the challenge lays. So then it becomes a question or a matter of building discipline within ourselves, which is easy at work when you punch a clock and somebody's paying you for your movements and your time. But when you're on your own time and there's that blanket of freedom to kind
Yeah.
of come and go and move about as you please, those are the times that it becomes challenging.
Yeah.
So talk, talk to me a little bit about how you how someone can go about actually building that discipline in that easy, relaxed, safe environment.
I mean, one of the things you could do is like most of us drive every day, like we're going somewhere. And most of the time when we're driving, unless you're in the country, it's usually kind of a stressful situation, being stuck in traffic and having to deal with, all the traffic patterns. And so that would be a good place where instead of getting in and cranking on your radio or your CD, and or calling a friend, that you just take that moment, you just tap into your breath, and tapping into our breath, whether it's a yoga practice, or whether it's walking, or whether it's sitting in the car, is just a really simple, easy way for us to connect with our body. And it could be as simple as, thinking to ourselves, like, inhale 1, exhale 1, inhale 2, exhale 2, just do 10. If we do those things for short moments throughout the day, then they kind of start to become a habit. And one of the things I found super useful is to pair the breath with some kind of physical sensation. So I would say you inhale and open your hands, and on your exhale, you touch your thumb to your pinky finger. And then you inhale, open your hands, and then you touch your thumb to your ring finger. And you do that twice, go through your hands, that's 10 breaths. Um, because somehow when we do the breath on its own, our mind can still drift. But when we pair that with some physical sensation, then it seems to stop our mind from wandering. And so we don't have to complicate it. It can be something super simple. Every time you get in the car, just do 10 little breaths. And then you're doing that multiple times throughout a day. And at least then you're kind of, you're tapping into yourself, or for a moment, you're getting out of yourself, right? You're getting out of all those thoughts and, our monkey mind, which is so powerful.
I really appreciate the fact that you just broke that down and made that so simple because I actually recently just got back from a hike with someone who came to me with the mission of working on their anger and frustration problems. And as we talked through things on the journey, I kept showing them little things that were just that simple. And when they get caught up in that anger and that frustration, it seems so foreign because we're so consumed with the idea of releasing that anger, releasing that frustration, that something as simple internally as focusing in on our breathing and moving our fingers from one finger to the next is very hard to remind ourselves of. So building that practice in that safe environment is preparing yourself for the moment that it's difficult and it's challenging. You're able to rely on things that you've already built. And a lot of what I showed and focused on during that journey was the steps that we've already walked in life, looking back on those things, reflecting on the positives as well as the negatives to find a context to bridge the gap when we're caught up in being angry or being upset. And when you do that in a mindful way and you practice it enough, you constantly remind yourself that there's a decision to be made based off of the stimulus. Am I going to get angry and lash out? Or am I going to go back to my breathing and touch my fingers and handle it in a better sort of way? So I really appreciate that. I really love the fact that you made it sound so simple and so touchable for everybody.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, is some people try to complicate it, or they try to force themselves to sit down in a quiet room for 20 minutes and sit still. And not everybody can do that. And, but if we could just do 10 breaths here and there, then we start to build on that and it starts to be more comfortable. And I think that um, there's these moments where we say somebody makes you angry, really, really angry, and then you leave that situation and then you go and you tell 10 people about the situation. It's almost like it re-triggers your body and your body's going through it again and it's like surging through your body, right? That anger, as you tell the story again, you're like reliving it and your body and your nervous system are feeling that anger again. And it would be in those moments, maybe even take a moment and tell 8 people instead of 10, and the last 2 focus on the breath, because the more we kind of rehash, especially things that aren't important. I think that it is important to process trauma, but it's not important to process how you waited in line in the DMV for 3 hours and it's super frustrating, or how you got stuck in traffic and somebody cut you off and you were really angry. Like those little things, those are unimportant. Um, and we don't need to relive those throughout the day. So yeah, so that person cuts you off and you feel your heart rate, rising and you start getting angry. And then it's just like, wait a minute, I can just find my breath here in this moment when I'm super pissed off. Your choice there is to go into the anger and rage and start flipping them off and getting really angry and let it ruin your day. Or you can take a minute and stop, tap into your breath, and you'll see like how fast those feelings just dissipate. They just disappear.
I find a lot of the time when that anger and that rage comes up during the recounting of it, we spit out the words, I can't. I couldn't keep myself calm. I can't deal with the situation at the time. And you know how you talk about the difference of it's important to deal with our traumas, but then there's, for example, being at the DMV is so insignificant in the weight. I feel like those are great opportunities to practice changing the words I can't or I couldn't to all of a sudden now, because I become aware of it and I become mindful about putting myself in the moment and sitting there, I can handle these things. And it's almost like sharpening the knife that you're going to start to chip away at those traumas. We take everything within our environment and we utilize it in a way that's going to help us to overcome, I guess you could say, trauma as being a goal. You can march your way there one step at a time by practicing in the different environments and situations of the day.
Yeah, and I love that you say this because it like when we say we can't, right? Then that means that we don't have control over our emotions and that's very disempowering, right? To put ourselves in the position like I can't control this. I can't control myself. I can't control these feelings. And they might come up and I don't want to say we just ignore them because we want to be aware of them and acknowledge them. And there's a space for them to be expressed, but there's also when we know that we have the ability to control ourselves in situations, and that's very empowering. It's very disempowering to say that we don't have control over our feelings. That is a little bit of a like the victim mentality, right? And we do have control. And we can practice in little ways so that when things are bigger, then they don't seem as big, or they can kind of dissipate a little bit faster. And not that I'm perfect. I still get frustrated at those people in traffic and I still have my days, right? And we're not perfect, but it's having grace with that. Like, yeah, okay. Guy cut me off and I'm super pissed off and I flip him a bird and then I'm like, oh my God, I just did that, right? Like I need to do better next time. We're not perfect, but then that doesn't scrap all the progress that we've made. It just shows us that little glimpse that there's a piece of us that we need to work on and then we can do better next time.
I think as I look back on my journey and I started to actually make the conscious effort to work on the vocabulary that I would use internally, it's when I would slip that I'd fall back into that pattern of disempowerment. But by practicing and becoming aware of it, offering myself that grace period to understand that I'm not perfect and things are going to happen, that it builds the skill to get you into a routine where things don't rattle you as fast or rattle you as deeply, and you're able to become more aware and manage the situation. And as I built that vocabulary to get there, it brought about a shift of the aura around me and the people that have started to attract into my circle. And those are the kind of things that when we're looking for results along our journey, that we measure how far we've come. But then there's also the fact that when we go through our meditation practices or physical movement practices, we can look at the results in a different sense, and we can see just how much more comfortable we've become with ourselves because it's projected into the world around us and how we respond. And
Wow.
as you start to focus on that, that's where you build that confidence. And as you build confidence, it can lead you further down that journey toward dealing with and overcoming the traumas that you feel are holding you back in life. And it's something that really sparks that fearless journey that we're all trying to live.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's those moments of quietness and self-reflection when we start to see the monkey mind and how intense it can be, and how we talk to ourselves, right? And sometimes we talk to ourselves in a way that we would never speak to other people. That we're really unkind to ourselves. And I've done this plenty in my life, where there's things I say to myself that I would not in a million years ever to say to somebody else. And so it is those moments of quietness and self-reflection where we can see what our patterns are and how we're speaking to ourselves, and maybe trying to think if that's the best way that we want to treat ourselves. And I mean, I like what you say about the people we hang out with too, because I think at some point we really need to evaluate our circle of people that we are with, and see if this circle is elevating us so that it makes us want to be the best version of ourselves that we want to be and that we can be, or if the circle that we're hanging out with is bringing us down and it's full of criticism and negativity and victim mentality.
That's one thing that I became aware of very quickly at the early stages of this journey is the people that you surround yourself with rub off on you. So you're inevitably guided by the color of the environment around you. And when you become aware of that through self-reflection and essentially just looking at things unbiasedly, you discover this and you start to kind of move away from it. But then there's that interesting transition period where you've left those colors or those people behind
Mhm.
and you're trying to find your way into this new surrounding and you don't know how to respond to it. You don't know how to react when this new group of people that are helping you to further your journey start to inevitably come around because they've been attracted to all the work that you've done to change internally and begun to project. And those are some of the weirdest and most awkward moments that I've experienced.
Yeah, 100%. I remember like so vividly, I got really deep into yoga practice a long time ago. And I was going 5, 6 days a week. I was absolutely addicted. Like there was nothing that I would do that would, like if there was an event that came up, like I just wouldn't skip the practice, and my friends didn't understand. And then like the mental and the spiritual aspect of yoga started creeping in, and I realized how I was spending my time with some of these people, and I didn't want to spend my time with them in that way. So one of my girlfriends, we'd always go shopping, and I would just buy all this junk, right, that I didn't need. And I started seeing this pattern that it just wasn't something that served me and that I was interested in anymore. And I remember going to her and having a conversation and saying, like, I really love you and I love hanging out, but like, let's go to lunch. And I like, don't want to do this shopping anymore. Or one of the girls, I'd always go and we'd watch a movie. And I'd say, well, I want to spend like quality time with you. I want to hang out. I want to talk with you. I don't want to just like watch movies. And so it changed how I wanted to spend my time. Um, and surprisingly, a lot of them were receptive to it. Some of the people weren't. And I think that there's this natural drifting away of the people that are going to pull you down. And that can be really hard. I had a year ago, I had a friend of 15 years that her and I drifted apart for that reason. And it was super painful, almost felt like a death for me. And strangely, when I released her out of my life, like fully released her and healed and mourned her like a death, um, all of a sudden, all these women came into my life, really powerful, beautiful women that I'm super, super close to now. And not just one, like a community of people. And I think sometimes it's that breaking of the past and letting go and cutting a cord, um, and releasing something that no longer serves us. And then all this good stuff comes in, but it's not easy and it can be super painful and it can be really challenging.
There's definitely the pain and the fear that wrap around with letting people go out of your lives or relinquishing things. But there's also the benefit. And when you get caught up in between, it becomes very hard to see. And one of the stories or analogies that I really like is the idea of you have a friend that, is struggling or they're on hard times, and you just happen to have something that would help them. So you give the item to them as a gift. And in the back of your mind, you can revisit that gift every so often when you go over to visit. One day you go downtown and you see it sitting in the window of a shop because they have sold it because they needed the money. And you're battling the idea of, do I run in and throw my money on the counter to take it home because it was mine and I valued it at one time? That's where we fall back into that old circle of friends. But if we've truly relinquished it, then we let it go, understanding that number one, it served a purpose in our life, but number two, in a roundabout way, it still benefited the overall picture of why I contributed. That's the real idea of relinquishing.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And letting go is so hard.
It's definitely a challenge. It's one of those things that it takes a lot of internal work and a lot of practice to get to a state where you're comfortable with it. And that brings me to where I want to transition as the fire starts to wind down here, is I want you to talk to someone that may be in that position where they're struggling with the balance of pretending to relinquish and truly finding the comfort inside to relinquish.
You mean
And
relinquishing
so,
like friendships or things that don't serve us any further?
exactly.
Yeah, I think it's like my husband said something long ago and it really resonated with me, is that there's all these different types of people in the world, right? Um, and that some people, not that people are like dark and evil, that's not what I'm saying here, but there's people that that are there's darkness in them and they're moving towards darkness. And then there's people that are dark that are moving towards light. And then there's people that are light moving towards light and people that are light moving towards darkness. And that really resonated with me because I think when I think about the people that are in my life, I really want somebody that's moving towards light. Either they are light and they're moving towards light, or they're in a dark space and they're moving towards light. And so it's about really for me, like gravitating towards those people that are working on themselves. They don't have to be perfect. I'm not perfect, right? Um, but they're working on themselves and they're taking these moments for self-reflection and they're moving towards something greater than themselves. And I understand like people get stuck. And so and allowing that process of people to be stuck and supporting people. But if you see people keep doing detrimental patterns and keep moving towards darkness or addiction, it's not necessarily like abandoning them, but at some point we need to take care of ourselves and what's best for us. And if somebody it feels like a weight or they're dragging us down, or we hang out with them and we feel drained and exhausted afterwards, or we go into the conversation with them and we feel really happy and positive and we come back and we're really like negative about the world and the perspective or ourselves, then that's a really good sign that that person might not be right for us. And maybe they'll be right for us later, right? But maybe they're not right for us in this moment. And so I think it's like spending time with people that elevate you, that make you feel good about yourself, that feel good about themselves, that are working on improving themselves, that are open to self-reflection and growth. And I think that that's important. And so instead of looking at abandoning others, I think it's really important to think of it as self-care, taking care of ourselves first.
I love how you brought that back to the point of self-care. Another way to view that is self-preservation, because I actually just heard a story the other day of a couple of people that were out hiking, and one of them decided to jump into a waterfall, into the stream, not realizing that there'd be a whirlpool and pull them down. Well, in the heat of the moment, their friend jumped in and ended up drowning as well.
Oh my
But
gosh.
had they taken the time to view that kind of from a logical point and think a little bit outside of the black and white, there could have been another way to where they got to protect themselves and still make the effort to save their friend's life. And I think that ties in beautifully to this conversation, because as we talk about self care, whatever that may look like, understanding that it's strengthening your resolve, it's broadening the picture and giving you the opportunity to take care of yourself so that you can be there for the people that you care about. But on the same hand, as you talked about, evaluating the people that you do allow into your circle, you have to do that as judge, jury, and executioner from an unbiased sort of framework, realizing that if you need to move away from someone, it's okay, because people come into your story and all the time, and they leave all the time as well. They're only there to teach you something. And those are the fundamental things that I think building a mindful practice, getting these sort of personalized rituals together really helps you to understand.
Mhm. Yeah.
So as we come to an end, now that we've kind of impacted some people here and got them thinking, I want to give you the opportunity to do all the self promotion and tell them what you got going on coming up and how they can get in touch with you, work with you, all that good stuff.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, we met on my podcast, the Connected Community Podcast, and that's a place to explore possibility through mindfulness, movement, and self-reflection. And so I have a plethora of guests on there with different topics that are in the spiritual realm. And yeah, so that's a beautiful podcast. And then people can find me at www.nickyyoga.com. So it's NICKYYYOGA.com. And I do online classes and Zoom yoga classes if people are interested. Yeah.
Those Zoom yoga classes can get difficult and scary at times. I had somebody talk me into doing one once, and somehow I managed to strain my leg, but
Oh my gosh.
that's a subject for a whole different story.
Well, I promise I take good care of my people on Zoom.
That there you go. Well, I will definitely make sure that I put all the links in the show notes as well as to our conversation on your podcast. I don't believe in goodbyes. I feel they're too permanent. So until we meet again, whether it's in this place or the next, safe and prosperous journeys.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for our beautiful conversation.
Absolutely.